It's the summer of 1977. Star Wars has just opened in cinemas and it's taken America and the rest of the world by storm. It's smashing box office records and blowing the minds of critics and audiences alike. Crowds are lining up around the block to get tickets, and theatres end up playing the film well past a typical theatrical run, some even showing it regularly for more than a year. The film is winning award after award for its pioneering visual effects, iconic sound and score, and spectacular production design. Less than 12 months following its release, Star Wars has become a household name, a cultural sensation, and the foundation for one of the biggest media franchises on the planet. It seems almost impossible now to imagine a world where Star Wars isn't a global phenomenon. It's easy to forget that this mythical space opera was a massive, expensive risk. What would have happened if the film wasn't a success? I've got a bad feeling about this.
Hello, I'm Alan Dean Foster. I'm the author of Splinter the Mind's Eye and a number of other things.
George Lucas approached Alan while A New Hope was still in production to write 2 books.
I was approached quite a number of years ago to do the novelization of an as yet unknown film called Star Wars, and also in the same contract to write an original sequel novel to Star Wars. George's idea being that if the first film didn't make any money, or wasn't a complete flop, he could make a sequel film utilizing as many of the props and backgrounds and costumes and presumably actors as possible as in the first film. So it was a very interesting way to approach a sequel book. The novelization of the film, of course, was very straightforward. I was given a copy of the then up-to-date script and a lot of Ralph McQuarrie's pre-production paintings, which were lovely, and set to work on the novelization, and at the same time tried to concoct an idea for a sequel that could be filmed on a low budget.
Alan was an admirer of Lucas's prior films, American Graffiti, THX 1138. So as a write-in gun for hire, he was attracted to the project.
I guess he liked me. I certainly liked him, and he had fun showing me around, I think. I don't know how he had time for it, as busy as he was, but it was like, come here, I want to show you something. And here's this beach ball size thing, that's the Death Star. And it was all, nice and friendly. And then basically it was go home and write the 2 books because he had finished the film. And that's how I came to write both the novelization of the original film, which George wanted his name on, which I was perfectly fine with. It's his universe, not mine, and the sequel novel.
Alan was given a lot of freedom to write what he wanted for Splinter of the Mind's Eye. However, it wasn't total carte blanche. I asked him what restrictions and direction Lucas gave him for the book.
Go write a novel set in this imaginary universe of Star Wars that I've created, George speaking there. And that was pretty much it, except for the fact that the resultant story had to be filmable on a low budget. I could not use Harrison Ford because he had not signed. In other words, I could not use the character of Han Solo because Harrison Ford had not signed on for any future projects. And when they said no Harrison Ford, no Han Solo, I figured, well, there's no point in putting Chewbacca in there because they're buddy-buddy all the time. And that's why there's no Han Solo and no Chewbacca in Splinter the Mind's Eye. When I was designing it, I set it all on a fog-shrouded, swampy planet because fog eliminates the need for a lot of expensive backgrounds. Similarly, a lot of it takes place underground where you can shoot on sets in a studio.
Yeah.
No expensive backgrounds. Remember, there's no CGI back in those days.
Yeah.
Everything is practical, pretty much practical effects. So bearing in mind those considerations, I was allowed to do anything I wanted within the context of Star Wars as it existed at that time.
Of course, with Star Wars being the huge success that it was, Splinter of the Mind's Eye never made it to the screen. The story it tells was wiped from the slate in favour of The Empire Strikes Back.
So Splinter just kind of sat there off to one side, And people say, well, you're disappointed that that was never made as a film. And of course I say yes, but that's what happens when you do, it's not my universe. I have my own universes to play in. Sure. And when you play in somebody else's sandbox, you use their pail and their shovel, or you don't do it.
If you want to see the full, amazing, never seen before, behind the scenes interview with the one and only Alan Dean Foster, it's available over on Patreon. Just a minute. Imagine a version of 1977 where Star Wars wasn't the newly crowned highest grossing film of all time. The Empire Strikes Back never happens. Instead, this is the sequel that would have been made. Not long after the events of A New Hope, Luke and Leia, no Han Solo or Chewbacca remember, travel to a star system in the hope that they can recruit the inhabitants into the Rebel Alliance. Leia's ship malfunctions and they crash on a swampy, foggy planet called Mimban. Think Dagobah, but with less 900-year-old talking frog puppets. They find a town, which is occupied by the Empire, by the way, and are approached by an old woman named Hala, who somehow senses that Luke is sensitive to the Force. She reveals a small shard of red glass, claiming that it's just a tiny fragment of a much larger gem known as the Kyber crystal, hidden somewhere in the jungle. She assures Luke that it possesses the ability to amplify the power of the Force for whoever wields it. Given that the Death Star has just blown up, you can see why that would be an attractive little trinket for the Empire. Hala wants Luke and Leia's help to find the crystal before the Empire does, and in return, she'll help them escape from Mimban. During a brief stint in an Imperial jail, don't ask, Luke and Leia encounter two big hairy fellas called Yazem. In a convenient twist of fate, Luke is able to understand and communicate with them and befriends the pair. The four of them break out of jail, rendezvous with Hala and the droids, and embark on their mission to find the crystal. In case you were wondering, yes, the sexual tension between Luke and Leia is more noticeable as the story progresses. Don't panic, it's fine. Remember that in this timeline, they're not twins, they're not siblings. They're just two young people fingering in the jungle. Don't make it weird. They encounter an indigenous tribe of aliens who live in underground caverns, and Luke is forced to duel with their champion, but he's not allowed to use his laser sword because that would be an unfair advantage. He wins by throwing a rock at his opponent's head using the Force, which doesn't sound very fair to me. And then the Imperial troops attack. After a frantic race against the Empire, they discover the Kyber crystal in an ancient temple embedded in the head of a statue of a god, which looks suspiciously like Cthulhu. I can't get away from that guy. But before they claim their prize, they must first contend with the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, Darth Vader. I've got a bad feeling about this. It's been a curious experience revisiting this galaxy far, far away in a timeline that no longer exists. Seeing things that were first introduced in Splinter, but which now live on in other Star Wars tales and lore. The Kyber crystal, for example, which in this novel is a true MacGuffin, an object that is there to drive the plot and the motivation of the characters, and not much more. In later stories, the basic concept of a Kyber crystal is reimagined and its properties put to use. They are the focusing element at the heart of every lightsaber. And Rogue One retroactively reveals Kyber to be the resource that powers the Death Star itself. Or how about Mimban, the swampy, foggy planet where the book takes place? Clearly a huge influence on Dagobah, where Luke finds Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. Mimban itself appears on screen in 2018 Solo, That's where Han finds himself stuck in the trenches fighting alongside the Imperial infantry. And it's on Mimban where Han meets Chewbacca for the first time, a scene very reminiscent of when Luke encounters the Yazem in jail in Splinter of the Mind's Eye. There are many other thematic elements that appear for the first time in Splinter that eventually show up on screen, if you know where to look, from a certain point of view. For example, this book contains the first of many Star Wars characters falling down big holes. And primitive locals fighting back against technologically superior forces. But in my opinion, the Splinter of the Mind's Eye's greatest legacy is that it has the honour of being the very first entry in what would later be known as the Star Wars Expanded Universe. A multimedia sensation telling stories in every corner of that galaxy. I'm not interested in debating or arguing which version of the Star Wars canon is best. It's all still there, and you can enjoy as much or as little of it as you want. I find it really interesting that right from the very beginning, Star Wars canon has been a fluid thing, readily overwritten by new ideas. But even when they are overwritten, they're never truly lost. They echo through time and pop up again in interesting places. I've got a bad feeling about this.